And so wept the fallen star, making rivers with his tears.
Isn't this rain?
The world was covered in water.
And from the bitter water, something grew.
An ice age.
It looked like glass.
It's like when we ate snow.
Well, the world changed. Society was developed.
It made a whole adventure some big old blasted line for me to be.
Johnny foretold exactly by the prophecy.
The bell's ringing now. Seems we've reached the final rounds. The tides of fate are drawn close, and soon an ocean of ink shall wash across the pages.
Lightners, can you stop it?
I look forward to creating a new future with you.
Do these words form a story? Is it Deltarune's story? Maybe. If it is, though, it's not the one we're familiar with. That story is about an adventure. It's about 3 strange, sad misfits becoming friends. It's about Ralsei learning to treat himself with the same kindness he shows to Chris and Susie. It's about Susie realizing she can express facets of her personality beyond toughness while still being tough. It's about Noelle wanting to be pushed down a flight of stairs, and whether or not Susie will oblige her. It's a story about King, Queen, and Tenna, Spamton and Jevil, undead grandpas, a mysterious night, and the quest to unravel a dark conspiracy that festers between the pillars of a small town community. It's a story about Chris playing the piano when they think no one's listening. But like the light world of Deltarune itself, this narrative only paints half the full picture. Those who studied the game closely enough will feel something stranger running in parallel, like a trickle of water beneath the floorboards of a cozy house. A different sort of story, written in the margins, across dark corners and jagged edges, stitched together from loose threads. A story lurking just below the surface, always daring you to take the plunge. This is a video about what I'm choosing to call the symbolic network of Deltarune. That is, the true odds and ends of Deltarune's lore. Rain and snow, fate carved in glass, and stars reflected in black waves far, far below. A constellation of words, images, and concepts echoing throughout the game with conspicuous emphasis, but scant little in the way of explanation or relevance to the affairs of its characters. The crumbs left at the bottom of the bag after you eat the last Dorito. On their own, these free-floating scraps of intrigue are nothing but loose ends on a game whose core narrative is already drowning in mystery. Complexity heaped atop complexity, something for players to notice and register as weird, then push to the periphery of their minds so they can ponder more pressing questions without distraction, like what I did for this video back in June. But, of course, putting a good mystery out of mind is no guarantee it will stay there, and I knew from the day chapters 3 and 4 dropped that I owed these misfit puzzle pieces a deep dive eventually. It was just a question of when the rot would come knocking. And now, as I sit writing this amid lengthening nights and fallen leaves, the spring having turned to summer and the summer turned to cold, it seems that time has come. As little as these symbolic breadcrumbs give us to work with, they don't give us nothing. What they lack in explicit context, they make up for in the dizzying spiderweb of connections that stretches between them. Connections as subtle as patterns of word choice, associations with conspicuous imagery, or simply physical proximity. Mapping out this web could tell us nothing, or it could be the key to unlocking the game's deepest secrets, probably somewhere in between, but the one thing that's for sure is that I'll never know if I don't try for myself. Please join me on this 2-part video series, a first for my channel, as I explore the sprawling symbolic network at Deltarune's foundation, and see what flickers of light may turn up in the game's darkest corners. Speaking of which,
Its very maker is shrouded in darkness.
Deltarune is no stranger to the dark.
You got people who think it would be a good idea to discover the true nature of darkness. You can see them out there with their lanterns. What is wrong with this picture?
Dark fountains, dark worlds, dark candies, dark light, shadow crystals and mantles and bumps in the night. Bars, From its very beginning, and even long before that, Deltarune has always been a game about darkness. The question of what that darkness is and what it means is a beast all its own, and a beast I will once again wrestle like Heracles with the second part of this video series, but if we're simply talking about the notable symbols used by Deltarune's narrative, darkness might as well be our welcome to town billboard. The pole at the center of the big top. There's a small self-destructive part of me that wants to put a segment here picking through and tabulating every single reference to darkness in Deltarune, just for the sake of completeness, I guess. But counterpoint, this video isn't titled Everything About, so fuck that. Fittingly for the subject, I think our best approach here is not to study the symbol of darkness via direct illumination, but instead to leave it as a sort of home base for other symbols and motifs to connect back to. In other words, make darkness the canvas over which Deltarune's other symbols are drawn, and in so doing, perhaps paint its portrait in negative space. With that being said, we have 8 more symbols to analyze, so I better not waste any more time. To kick things off, we'll consider a pair of symbols that should be familiar to anyone who attended Sunday school or plays Ultrakill. Let's talk about Heaven and Hell. The year is 800 AD. You toil in your cloister with a feather pen, transcribing biblical texts onto vellum sheets. Travel is difficult, the vastness of the earthly world beyond your reach, but high above and far below you feel the cosmos whirl around you in a fatal dance. Reality is at war. The world of men a battlefield between heaven and hell, good and evil, mortal souls but peasants caught between armies of inconceivable might. Your path is a tightrope over fire and death, your life both performance and trial, mind free to play its role, to choose between God and the devil, but never to question the script. The duality, the axis around which all things turn, the dividing line gouged into the bones of the universe, between that which is good and that which is not. Now skip ahead about 1,000 years and replace both those concepts with shrugging symbolic gestures toward vaguely opposed supernatural forces of ambiguous nature and morality, and we're ready to talk about heaven and hell in the context of Deltarune. Although Deltarune's eponymous religion is more or less a palette-swapped OC of Protestant Christianity, the game makes it clear that Hometown's church has no concept of salvation, damnation, or seemingly any soteriological philosophy whatsoever. Under these conditions, the theologically inclined player may find themselves asking, what do heaven and hell mean in a belief system that doesn't care about the afterlife? And I would say the most appropriate answer to this quandary is nothing in particular. That's kind of the point of this symbol business. The game hands us images and concepts divorced or mutated from the meanings we're familiar with, i.e. symbols, and we deduce what new meanings the game has assigned to those symbols by studying how they're used. By emptying our minds of associations we attach to heaven and hell in the real world, we can find out what Deltarune associates with them, and hopefully, someday, understand what the fuck is going on. Sound good? Okay, let's start upstairs and do the basement later. First on our list of heavenly associates, a fruit hanging so low that it's liable to have prompted the original sin. The angel. How do we know the angel is tied to heaven? It has one. Strictly speaking, we can't say whether the angel owns its heaven or just lives there, can't judge in this economy, but the point is made either way that angels are just as synonymous with heaven in Deltarune's world as in ours, and that anything we can directly connect to the angel can be placed under the heavenly umbrella by proximity. Case in point, Noelle Holiday, and the million ways Deltarune bends over backward to associate her with the angel. Honestly, I still don't know what the fuck this means, but it's worth noting down. Another entity in the game that harbors some subtle ties to the angel is, shockingly, the institutional fucking religion that worships it. This sounds obvious, but the Chapter 4 church service actually lets us lock in a highly load-bearing connection that would otherwise be just ambiguous enough to annoy me. The Deltarune prophecy is, itself, worshipped alongside the angel, implying that it is heavenly in nature. Frustratingly, the wording of Caddy's zooted Bible recitation doesn't quite pin down whether the angel is the definitive source of the prophecy or merely a character within it, but Alvin's later remarks about the angel assigning Asgore a difficult path is a pretty strong hint toward the former, since it implies a common belief that the angel governs fate. Not all connections to heaven have to go through the angel. One of the game's first mentions of the divine outside of Ralsei's initial prophecy is when King refers to the dark fountains as holy. Probably not by coincidence, the Holy is also the name of the music that plays when approaching the dark fountains in chapters 1 and 2. This creates the first of our promised links back to the Ur symbol of darkness, in this case implying the dark is associated with heaven in Deltarune's world. Not quite as intuitive as angels being up there, but this is why it's important to check what the game is saying about its own cosmology and not just rely on intuitions from IRL Christianity. Something you definitely won't learn from Bible Studies class IRL is an association between heaven and telephones. You also might not learn this by playing Deltarune, but let me explain. This one prophecy mural in Chapter 4, part of a room containing the most direct juxtaposition of heaven and hell yet seen in the game, reads thus:
"They'll hear the ring of heaven's call."
At first glance, this seems in line with previous references to the angel making some sort of cry. Noisy fucking cosmology, Deltarune's got. But on closer inspection, the wording is rather specific. The ring of the call. The topic of spooky phone calls is obviously a whole can of worms in Deltarune, but there's two main points this brings to mind: Spamton's mysterious benefactor and the secret phone calls that Chris makes from the holiday residence. In the latter case, outside of deliberate misdirection on the game's part, coincidences happen in real life because there is no god. I think we're safe to conclude the caller is Carol Holiday, or at least a group containing Carol Holiday. In that case, the prophecy's words could apply in a more conceptual sense, meaning the orders Chris takes by phone represent heaven's will, i.e. the path ordained by the angel, i.e. the prophecy. The Roaring Night Conspiracy group chat wants Chris to follow the prophecy. Without branching into a whole new discussion, sorting factions into pro-prophecy versus anti-prophecy motivations, let's just say this checks out to me, especially considering the final moment of Chapter 4 is Chris getting a phone call reminding them to stay in line after Susie tempts them to rebel against their fate. Spamton's case is more tantalizing, because the identity of the voice on the other end of his phone is still a big fuck-off mystery. It's a bit of a leap to conclude from this prophecy alone that Spamton was taking calls direct from the angel itself, especially considering how stacked the ballot is for this particular seat in Deltarune's mystery box parliament, but there's one additional layer here that piques my interest. The line of flavor text in the Spamton neophyte that reads, "It pulls the strings and makes them ring." Back in Chapter 2, this mainly seemed like a reference to Spamton's benefactor being his puppet master, pulling the strings, and communicating by phone, making it ring. With the infusion of context we've gotten since Chapter 3, though, this line potentially takes on a double meaning. It could be describing someone playing guitar. Someone perhaps named December. So to get back to the original point, this Ring of Heaven's Call prophecy sort of unfolds into a gymnastics routine where you springboard off of existing Death Knight evidence, swing around the Spamton guitar connections a few times, backflip up to the prophecy that links ringing and phone calls to heaven, which the Knight is already associated with because its conspiracy is prophecy accelerationist or something, and ultimately land in a crumpled heap with the conclusion that Des is the Knight who is also Spamton's phone guy, in which case, fuck it, she's probably also the person who drove Jevil insane and gave Gerson a shadow crystal. Maybe. Honestly, I don't even know what this one. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Deltarune's final notable reference to heaven comes right at the end of Chapter 4, during the Titan boss fight. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but this guy's head is decked out with more angel wings than Asriel's DeviantArt gallery. Hey buddy, the 7th Chahal call, the cherubim chorus wants their baritone back. With such unsubtle imagery in play, we can only conclude, once again, that Deltarune's angel, and its heaven by extension, share a fundamental link with darkness, since the creature spurting all these angel wings is nothing less than an avatar of the Dark Fountains themselves. With all the evidence in play that Deltarune's angel is of the dark variety, a question may come to mind. What about light? If heaven is dark, does that mean the opposite of dark is hell? The symbol of light in general isn't given nearly as much attention as darkness, but it's not totally absent from Deltarune either. 3 references to light, strangely enough, seem to also tie it to heaven. First, and most straightforwardly, when we first talk to Alvin in Chapter 1, he bids Chris farewell with the phrase, "Let the angel's power light your way." This does imply the angel is commonly associated with light, even if just metaphorically. Second, the description of Ralsei's heal prayer ability reads, quote, "Heavenly light restores a little HP to one party member." I hadn't really considered until now how weird it is that the signature skill of the first Darkner you meet is summoning light, but that's what it says. Finally, at some point during the real-time mental breakdown that passes as the intro for Spamton's boss fight, he mentions seeing past the dark into heaven. While not as direct as Alvin's line, this still positions Spamton's concept of heaven as definitionally lacking in darkness, i.e. having light. It's important to consider here, though, that Spamton is a Darkner, and thus the heaven he refers to is likely actually the light world, so-called for not being dark, and his statement doesn't necessarily reflect the heaven occupied by the angel. From a bigger picture viewpoint, though, I think trying to quarantine Spamton's Darkner concept of heaven from, say, Father Alvin's Lightner concept of the angel's heaven is missing the forest for the trees. The premise of Deltarune centers on stacked layers of reality and fiction, the light world above the dark world, and the dark world above the Chapter 3 Tenna video game, and so on. While it may be true that heaven to a Darkner is nothing but Deltarune's light world, the layer of reality directly above it, I think the key question this is meant to pose is, why should the light world's heaven be any different? Why, in this Matryoshka doll narrative, shouldn't heaven be a relative term? Looking up from the summit of Everest versus the bottom of the ocean treats you to pretty different views. As for the first two examples, the Father Alvin quote and the reference to Heavenly Light and Ralsei's spell, you could argue that these are both pretty offhanded default RPG-isms from the first chapter of the game, when the world building was still a bit wibbly-wobbly, but both of them together, on top of the aforementioned Spamton stuff, put a pretty serious landmine in the path of any burgeoning heaven is dark, hell is light narratives. Then, if you scrape through the absolute pittance of hell symbolism the game gives us, the first thing we see is Jevil tying hell to something called the Depths, which for a variety of soon-to-be-discussed reasons is strongly associated with darkness. The nail in the coffin here is a detail I conveniently forgot to mention about the Titan boss fight before. This supposed avatar of darkness, covered in angel wings, has the save point icon I've literally been using as a shorthand for light stapled to its face. The signals here couldn't be more mixed if you handed them off to Grandmaster fucking Flash. The conclusion here, and I really am sorry to be this guy, is that Deltarune's heaven and hell don't seem to come with any exclusive affinity for either darkness or light in particular. It's just not a one-to-one deal. This is somewhat disappointing, but the good news is that we're far from done talking about light symbolism itself. So far I've only brought up examples of light relevant to heaven and hell, and in so doing, I've skipped right over Deltarune's one true beacon of light associations: the soul. It glows, it shines, it emits brilliant light. Brilliant enough to dispel shadows that grow darker than dark. 2 out of 2 songs in the game that feature lyrics shout out the soul as a vessel of light. King calls Chris Lightbringer by association with it. Whatever light is absent from heaven, it seems, is to be found here, in the little red fingerprint we leave on the glass of Deltarune's world. Our point of contact. Then of course we have the save points, represented by a light only we can see. Chris is potentially implied to have seen the save points before the game started, but even ignoring the player's involvement here, a yet more pressing through line between soul and save points remains. This fucking guy. Okay, look, I know breaking into the Gaster before noon is seen as a bit taboo in the Deltarune sphere, but after 4 years of this I need to believe that we as a community have reached a collective level of enlightenment and forward-mindedness where I can casually drop references to Gaster controlling the save file system and the Gunner Maker sequence without you all clutching your pearls and fainting. With that said, if Gaster runs the save file system, that would include the save points, and if Gaster MCs the Gonner Maker, then he's the one who either generates or summons your soul. And just like that, Mr. Dark Darker Yet Darker himself turns up at the intersection of the game's most prominent light imagery. How very interesting. Exactly what this association is meant to mean is a bit outside the scope of just fucking kidding. I actually have a crack theory about this for once, and you're going to listen to it. First though, we need to take a brief detour from turtlenecks to turtles to consider one last puzzle piece: Gerson's boss fight dialogue. While Gerson never drops the L word directly, he does talk at length about a certain power which can overwrite the dark. A power he colorfully envisions as a white pen piercing the black of ink-soaked parchment. This all sounds rather light-coded, and especially similar to the Red Soul's previously discussed habit of banishing the dark fountains by cosplaying as a flashbang grenade. But when Gerson himself puts a name to this power, he calls it hope, implying the symbolic roles of light and hope in Deltarune are perhaps very tightly entwined. Gerson claims that Susie is the carrier of this power, which I don't think is wrong, considering she's a plot-armored narrative wrecking ball, but Susie herself is quick to point out that if anyone in the gang wields a pen, it's Chris. In context, the line is played as a snappy one-liner to cut off Gerson's monologuing, but I think Susie may have been more insightful here than she realized. Chris, whose soul glows with light. Chris, who wields the unique power to cut through the dark of the fountains and can reach out to forces beyond time and space through glimmers of light only they can see. Perhaps the true white pen Chris carries takes the shape not of a sword, but a heart. So then, if we follow Gerson's words to their conclusion and assume the light within Chris's soul is, in fact, the power of hope, where'd all the hope come from? Gerson goes and class-specs Susie as a hope-type entity, but we don't see her going around and sealing fountains and bioluminescing like a deep-sea eel. Whatever's going on with Chris's soul is clearly well outside the bounds of normal, something closer to the preternatural levels of determination carried by Frisk in Undertale. Determination that, as it happens, was metatextually implied to manifest from the player and the godlike position of power they held living in a reality beyond the game's own. We're a bit early in Deltarune for these kind of meta-narrative implications to become explicit in the text, but I wonder, has there been any hint, any illusion in the charybdal cyclone of peripheral material straddling this game's fourth wall that ties the IRL players to light or to hope? I said this was a crack theory. Boom! Clickbait title.
The light inside Chris's soul is actually Deltarune launch hype.
But actually though, kind of, that's more or less the conclusion. I admit it's wacky, just one guess among many, but I can't deny there's a certain charm to this reading. For as little as we know about Dr. Gaster, what is clear is that he's a mad scientist, and what do mad scientists love more than harnessing forces of nature beyond their comprehension? Faust had his demons, Lawrence had his elder god blood, and Alphys had a tote bin of human souls. Whatever Gaster's scheming from his haunt within the ductwork of Deltarune's cosmos, his plans are grand in scale, building new futures and meddling with fate. And when the need arises to move narrative mountains, one must seek a force of equal measure. And believe it or not, the game actually hands us precedent for hope, specifically trickling from one layer of reality to become a power source in another. Spamton Neo's body. According to SWAT, the robot Spamton possesses was the creation of a Lightner, likely Mettaton's attempt to illustrate his own ideal body, and it was the hope this Lightner poured into their creation that imbued the resultant Darkner with so much power. What might be accomplished, then, if an object in the light world found itself filled with the hopes of a being lighter than light? Couple this with the fact that Toby Fox seems at least somewhat interested in using Deltarune's story to examine his own legacy as a game dev, and I hope you can see why the thought of Gaster hunched over in his trans-dimensional Frankenstein castle with droves of ravening Undertale fans as the thunderclouds swirling overhead just kind of vibes somehow. And if you don't think it vibes, who cares? This reading isn't the point of the video, it just fell into my lap while I was trying to catalog heaven and hell symbolism. Wait, I was supposed to be cataloging hell symbolism. Okay, here's the thing. I know you all want me to talk about the Tale of Hell. It's new, it's weird, it looks great stapled to Image Friend's ass.
Cat Headers Connections.
Fuck, I was excited to analyze hell symbolism too, but upon trying to actually write the script, I realized that what you're seeing on screen right now is basically all we have to work with. Compared to Heaven, which comes with a whole angel's worth of lore to unpack, Deltarune's Hell is a black box, a motif clinging to existence via hushed references, toothpicks, and Elmer's glue. Not counting expletives or jokes, the word hell was used in Deltarune precisely twice. First by Jevil as part of his weird portent about hell's roar bubbling from the depths, and then again in the Tale of Hell prophecy mural. Jevil's line is confusing. Not only does it tell us very little about hell's nature, the one thing it does give us, an association between hell and something watery sounding called the depths, will prove to be the only thing in the game that ever associates these two concepts. Thank you, Jevil, very cool. Just 3 short chapters later though, when the game has at last seen fit to lift us out of the Dark Ages and give us one single solid piece of information about hell. It has a tail. Gonna be honest, Toby, weird place to start, but we can work with this. Mercifully, this sudden outbreak of tail iconography doesn't lead to an immediate dead end. Chapter 4 throws in a modest handful of breadcrumbs to help us along, the most significant of which being this scrambled message from a no-name NPC in a hidden room. Using some hints from the new Spamton sweepstakes pages of all fucking things, we can unscramble the words to form, "Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail. The poor children." How ominous. A line of combat dialogue from the organic Darkners also seems to reference the same event, the tale which must not be followed. Curiously, this mirrors another line from the same enemy mentioning a tale which must be followed, this time spelled T-A-L-E, which almost certainly refers to the prophecy. This does, if you squint, position this pointed tail doohickey as a sort of opposite counterpart to the prophecy, an antichrist by way of pun, which at least for Toby Fox should be familiar territory. Before we get too excited though, please direct your attention to our constitutionally mandated dose of confounding bullshit. The Tale of Hell depicted in the prophecy mural is literally pointless. It does not have a point. Pointed tails do have points. Checkmate atheists. As if this wasn't already stupid enough, there is a second, unused version of the Tale of Hell mural in the game's files, where, miracle of miracles, it does end in a point. So which is it, Toby? Do you want us to think these are the same tale or not? If you didn't, it might have been a good idea not to introduce them back to back in the same chapter as the first references to lore-relevant tales in the entire game. As it stands, fuck that noise, the pointed tail and the Tale of Hell are the same tale, which must not be followed, unlike the prophecy, meaning hell is opposed to the prophecy, which I would have guessed anyway because the prophecy is tied to heaven. Could I be wrong? Yes. Will it matter? Probably not. Aside from the aforementioned tale lore, hell references are constrained to the vaguest of the vague. Gaster's tied to the number of the beast for some reason, maybe to do with wanting a new future, therefore disrupting the prophecy. Chris wore what could be called devil horns as a child, and is rumored to have attempted a demon summoning with Caddy. There's also one single reference to a crying demon heart in the lyrics to Raise Up Your Bat, which by default seems to point to Chris's soul by virtue of it being Deltarune's only notable heart. But then again, I've never known it to do much crying. Bottom line here is that Deltarune's hell lore is a fucking mess, and I'm just gonna choose not to muck around in it until hopefully getting some more solid data in Chapter 5. With that, I'm officially sick of the heaven and hell warm-up analysis. It's time to move on to a motif which, in my estimation, is both easier to miss and cuts closer to the heart of Deltarune's premise. The symbol in question being, of course, water. Yes, water. What, you want Rudy Night? You want Chris' severed hand theory? Nuh-uh. You come to my channel, we talk about water. Actually though, it's interesting. Water in Deltarune is everywhere. Both physically, because, the water cycle, but also metaphysically. If Deltarune's symbolic ecosystem was a shoe, it would squelch when you walked in it. If it was a lake, it would drown you. This may be old news to you if you've been around the Delta lore block a few times, but if not, don't worry, I'm going to go through every example from the start and get us all up to speed. And by the start, I mean the start. Chapter 1 Survey Program Goner Maker Sequence. The ethereal purple background here is stitched together from several copies of a texture in the game's files known as image_depth. Within the world of Deltarune analysis, this texture basically has its own fandom at this point, in no small part because it uses the rare and coveted all-caps file name format. Explaining why that matters takes 10 hours, so go watch Device Theory then come back. Welcome back, I hope you enjoyed Device Theory. The first thing to note about image depth for the purposes of this video is that it's actually a modified stock photo of the surface of the ocean. The first visual asset the game shows you, besides text and the soul, is literally a picture of water. Let that sink in for a sec. The third thing to note is that, in addition to the Goner Maker background, this texture has a habit of popping up throughout Deltarune in some very interesting places. First among which is the Dark Fountains. See this scrolling pattern? That's image depth. It also appears around the night during its Chapter 3 boss fight, in the air as Chris and Susie chase it toward the fountain, and on the floating prophecy murals in Chapter 4. File that last one away, we'll be talking about it later. Even aside from their connection to image depth though, the Dark Fountains are what I'd call the game's second major reference to water. Why? Because they're fucking fountains, a word for when a bunch of water sprays out of a hole. The game's characters even call them geysers a couple times for variety, so the hydrological parallel is pretty on the nose. What's maybe more on the nose is the inventory descriptions of shadow crystals and the shadow mantle, both invoking images of shadows moving, quote, like water. Next, and we'll be talking about this one for a while, so buckle in, if Onion-san is spoken to in Chapter 2, they will nervously inform Chris of a faint melody they can sometimes hear at night, coming from deep under the waters of the lake. They go on to say the melody is a fragment of a longer song they've heard before, coming from the sea, which is not the same as the lake by the way, and cryptically that the song is not new. Despite promising to investigate and report back tomorrow, Onion-san never appears in Chapter 4, and if Chris and Susie sit by the lake at night, Susie will then comment that she can hear faint music from across the water. Whether or not you, the player, can actually hear any music in this scene is, incredibly, a debated question. There's a video about it in the description if you want, but I won't be discussing it further because even the notes you supposedly can hear have no relevance to anything as far as I can tell. Discussion of the song from the lake wouldn't be complete though without mentioning this perplexing line of Gerson dialogue that seems to reveal that the song was, all along, the ringing of the hammer of justice. I say perplexing because this looks like an explicit reveal of the mystery, but somehow doesn't feel like one. The obvious conclusion this points to is that the Hammer of Justice to which Gerson refers is in fact the Hammer of Justice from the Deltarune soundtrack, i.e. his own theme song. This does line up with Onion-san's remark about the song not being new, since Hammer of Justice heavily reuses melodies from Undyne's theme in Undertale, Spear of Justice. However, aside from posing even deeper questions about how Onion-san is aware of Undertale music and how they heard Gerson's theme before his Dark World was ever created, this overall seems like a strangely throwaway conclusion to a subplot with so much ominous build-up, and does nothing to resolve Onion-san's mysterious absence in Chapter 4. I'm willing to bet there's still more to learn about the song from the lake in future chapters, but even if Gerson has the last word on the subject, it's still enough to draw a link between the depths of the lake and the Dark Worlds, considering it somehow echoes music associated with the resurrected Darkener version of Gerson Boom. Speaking of Gerson, his boss fight contains some of the hardest hitting lines in the game so far, not least of which are the following.
For the tides of fate are drawn close, and soon an ocean of ink will wash across the pages.
Once again, tides and oceans, this time used as an allegory for what is clearly meant to be the roaring, and what is ink if not dark water. To get our next aquatic reference, we'll have to break up my personal vote for the most lore-dense block of text in all of Deltarune, the lyrics to Raise Up Your Bat. Play it again, Sam.
Come follow me into the dark with your heart as the arc which shall shine you the way. Because I'm with you in the dark with your heart as my mark which shall guide you the way through the waves.
For the purposes of the current discussion, there's at least two lines here to take note of. with your heart as the arc, which will guide you the way through the waves. Coupled with Gerson's remark about the flood of ink, this seems to push us into downright biblical territory, an obliterating flood of darkness and a metaphysical arc to survive it. Furthermore, considering the parallel structure of the chorus, the heart shining through the dark and guiding the way through the waves are positioned as somehow analogous actions. I'm sure it's obvious at this point, but I'm just going to come out and say it. The pattern that Deltarune is establishing here is that water is tied to darkness, potentially even, in some sense, equivalent to it, with each concept acting as a loose alias for the other. A world covered in darkness, pages drowned in ink, a light to pierce the dark, and an arc to navigate the waves. Darkness surging from the earth as geysers, sharp shadows moving like water, and image depth slathered over everything like an ocean view postcard. Like it or not, understand it or not, Delta Water and Delta Darkness are a package deal, and figuring out why is all of our problem. More on that later though, we gotta finish the water segment first. What, did you think that was it? Those are just the examples connecting water to darkness. This gets worse. To dive deeper into the abyss of water symbolism, I'd like to introduce a new subcategory of water manifestations in Deltarune: rainfall. Rain, to be clear, is water. I'm not saying it's a separate ballgame from the water-darkness duality we've been discussing until now, but water in the particular form of rainfall seems to hold a certain special significance to the new chapters, and even bears a lineage stretching back to Undertale as an object of interest for lore weirdos. The first inklings of this date back to before Chapter 3 and 4 even launched, in the updated Spamton Sweepstakes pages that appeared on the Deltarune website in May to tease the upcoming chapters. The largest of these pages, helpfully titled deltarune.com/rain, recounts a day from Noelle's childhood when her mother had school cancelled because of a heavy downpour. The main purpose of this page seems to be foreshadowing the Mike minigames in Chapter 4 and throwing out some of the first breadcrumbs of lore about Friend, but this information being framed in the context of a rainstorm feels deliberate, especially considering Carol, of all people, has the strongest reaction to the weather. Does the mayor have some history with rain? Then, of course, Chapter 4 introduced rain as a plot point in Deltarune's present tense, a sudden bout of inclement weather prompting Chris and Susie to seek out Toriel and subsequently discover that chapter's dark world. The rain was also the reason Toriel cancelled choir practice and serendipitously avoided entering the dark world at all, potentially preventing her capture by the night. Without the rain, Chapter 4's second half would have taken a totally different course. Rounding out this hat-trick is the wonderfully melancholic aftermath of the church dark world, during which time the game just goes ahead and drops Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4 OST, Track 70, The Place Where It Rained. If you're not a big Undertale head, it might not be intuitive why, but the inclusion of this track with this title and this motif is actually such a mic drop on Tricky Tony's part that Vivat Veritas made an entire video on just that topic, link in the doobly-doo. To summarize though, this is an apropos of nothing reprise of It's Raining Somewhere Else, one of Sans' themes from Undertale. Dropping The Place Where It Rained in Deltarune represented the payoff to a loose thread stretching back almost 10 years, and acts as downright rocket fuel for the building implication that Sans somehow traveled to Undertale from Deltarune. If that's true, it seems Deltarune's entire universe, from the perspective of a certain convenience store janitor, might be fundamentally entwined with rain. Finally, to bridge the gap back to more big-picture analysis, I'll need to call in one last salvo of rain lore from the USS Deltarune, and that means talking about the one and only Miss Mizzle. Yep, the one who speaks in Andrew Hussey dialogue. This aqueous loquacious mini-boss may be mostly a comedic time sink, but if we dredge her depths, if we comb the fine print, we may find she's hiding some surprisingly spicy lore. Exhibit A is this bit of flavor text reading, "Waves crash far, far, far below." One could argue this is simply in reference to Miss Mizzle being made of water and atop a tall platform, but if we instead choose to look behind the blue curtains, we can take a hint from the ominous triple repetition of far and draw a connection between this line and the other references to deep water we've previously discussed, reinforcing that motif further. The real kicker though is Exhibit B, the Embezzle Act. When fighting Miss Mizzle and her non-mini-boss cousins, the Mizzles, Chris and Susie can join forces to embezzle items from the enemy team. Against normal Mizzles, this only nets a prosaic selection of healing items and money, but against Miss Mizzle, there is a single guaranteed drop. A literal drop. The Bitter Tear is the best healing item in the game, and damn near the most difficult to find. Only 2 of them can currently be obtained in the entirety of Deltarune's runtime, one by ripping off Miss Mizzle, and the other by dumping Chris's 401k into this off-brand fairy fountain. Their scarcity and mechanical power make Bitter Tears seem like kind of a big deal, so what light world object then is so special that it warrants all this pomp and circumstance when manifested as an item in the dark world? What could possibly be this significant? Bitter tears are raindrops. Not only does its inventory description make this clear, but if you waste one by giving it to Susie outside of combat, her reaction is even more explicit. Isn't this rain? So, Rain, which featured prominently in the Holiday Girl blog post that heralded the new chapters, which was a plot-defining set piece of Chapter 4, and which caps off the new content by teasing a connection back to Undertale of all things, also forms the rarest and most powerful healing item when taken to the Dark Worlds. The plot thickens, but where's it going? Rain clearly holds meaning in the new chapters, too many things point back to it, there's too much unexplained gravitas, but relevance alone isn't enough. We need a direction, a Rosetta Stone, a lightning rod to absorb all of this narrative charge. We need one more clue.
And so wept the fallen star, making rivers with its tears. Then slowly, from the bitter water, something grew. It looked like
glass. In an unlabeled book, on an unmarked bookshelf, in the corner of this strange and anonymous room, lies the key to the rest of this analysis. The main cable of a suspension bridge we will build wire by wire from our established world of rain, water, and darkness into the outer reaches of Deltarune's symbolic network. If one thing is clear about the Fallen Star passage, it's that we are not meant to understand it yet. The text comes almost completely sanitized of context and reads like the Book of Revelations. It is the only time in the game that a fallen star is ever referenced. Ever since playing Chapter 4, the thought of having to analyze it has been gnawing at my dreams like Harry Dubois' ex-wife. But, in lieu of a more complete understanding, there is one thing we can still do in the meantime. Keep our heads down, and follow the symbols. And boy does this book give us some symbols to follow. Alright, here's the skinny. There is apparently something or someone called the Fallen Star, which cries tears of bitter water, i.e. bitter tears, i.e. rain. The whole previous section about rain's metaphysical significance, safe bet is this is the culprit. Rain in Deltarune is special because it is the tears of a fallen fucking star. Point 2. From the rivers of bitter water produced by said tears of the fallen star, i.e. rain, something grows which resembles glass. Star begets rain begets glass. Capiche? We've looked at rain and water extensively, so that leaves two leads, stars and glass. Stars turn out to have a minor motivic presence in Deltarune, mostly starting in Chapter 3 with the appearance of the Roaring Night, which uses star-shaped attacks in battle and has the elemental type of star/dark. The Shadow Mantle, in turn, blocks star and dark type damage. If we look on the walls of Dessa's bedroom, we also find a smattering of glow-in-the-dark star stickers, which might be a nod to her being the Knight, but also might just be a bug she caught from Asriel during all that time she spent sucking dental hardware out of his mouth. So, while star imagery is in play and is potentially relevant to guessing who the Fallen Star actually is, it's an angle that dead-ends pretty quickly as of Chapter 4. And so, one might say our next topic is clear. Let's talk about glass. I can't speak for all of you, but when I think about plot-relevant glass in Deltarune, the first thing that comes to mind is the shadow crystals. Not only do these rare MacGuffins manifest as shards of glass in the light world, their dark world form is described as sharp shadows that move like water, retroactively foreshadowing the new water-glass duality that the Fallen Star passage spells out. Water, darkness, and glass, it seems, are all sides of the same non-Euclidean three-sided coin in Deltarune's world, and shadow crystals live in the dead center of that Venn diagram. Toby, what can I say? I really hope you're going somewhere with this. For now, though, there's other examples of glass to consider, such as the other small, dark, triangular, mysterious glass-like object you get as a reward from a secret boss, the Black Shard. This weapon's flavor text explicitly describes it as a shard of opaque black glass. Considering where you obtain it, the Black Shard could maybe serve to tie the Knight into all of this Fallen Star business, if they weren't already tied in by their unique association with stars. Beyond that, we know too little about the Black Shard's nature to follow that lead much further. Next, by far the weirdest thing on this list, the cracked conch. Conch. This unique object appears on the beach of the island board in Chapter 3, and the flavor text for inspecting it is as conspicuous as it is baffling. A cracked conch, surrounded by washed-up glass. Not a person seemed to want it. There's some additional text concerning the sound of the ocean or whatever, which I'm sure won't be important later, but on the topic of glass, the first line steals the show. Even more than the shadow crystals moving like water, this is the single most explicit example the game gives us of glass emerging from the waves. So, hooray, the phenomenon really does exist outside of just that one dusty book in Chapter 4. It would be nice if it came packaged with any context whatsoever instead of being bolted to the most mysterious piece of shit in the universe, but, I'll take what I can get. Within the scope of chapters 1 to 3, these few examples account for more or less all the prominent glass imagery the game has to offer. If we stopped here, you might think of them as a cluster of curious outliers, but probably not a central motif for the game. Lucky for us, Deltarune doesn't have 3 chapters. The scent of glass and incense. A glass tapestry rings above you. Blue glass glitters like crystals. The truth written in glass. The truth sung in glass. Amen. Chris, the glass. I didn't notice. You're bleeding. Maybe releasing chapters 1 and 2 for free was putting some strain on Toby's wallet after all, because chapter 4 was apparently produced in collaboration with the Massachusetts Trade Union of Glaziers and Glassblowers. From an aesthetic point of view, chapter 4's obsession with glass has a pretty obvious explanation. The Dark World is a church. Churches have stained glass. Entire schools of architecture were developed around the goal of filling churches with more stained glass. Narratively though, this motif I think has a much deeper and more specific origin. Glass is the medium of the prophecy. You didn't think I'd really forgotten about these guys, did you? I know, I should have mentioned the prophecy murals back in the water symbolism section. They're probably the most conspicuous use of image depths in the whole game, besides the Gonnermaker background itself. But their relevance to the topic of glass is so crucial that I couldn't resist keeping them up my sleeve. The stained glass murals festooning the halls of Chapter 4's Dark World are, in the most literal possible sense, representations of the Deltarune prophecy. Think of it this way, the denizens and decor of the Dark Sanctuary are all really just the contents of a church reimagined by the power of the Dark Fountain. Its organ becomes flute-headed philosophers, its solo cups become knights, its whatever this is becomes whatever that is. What, then, do the floating prophecy murals represent but the Deltarune religion itself? The very concept of fate drawn from the holy ground of Father Alvin's chapel and manifested as physical objects. If destiny was something you could reach out and touch, according to Chapter 4, it would feel like a cracked window pane. Not only is glass visibly the medium through which the prophecy manifests, but the chapter includes several lines of dialogue highlighting this connection. The truth written in glass. The truth sung in glass. Amen. The picture this paints to me is of glass having a more fundamental, elemental connection to the prophecy than simply being a surplus craft material the Dark Sanctuary was trying to clear out of its warehouses. I think, in short, that glass may be Deltarune's symbol for fate, the physical substance of the prophecy. Just on an aesthetic level, it does make some sense. Glass is hard but brittle. Any crack or chip can immediately shatter the whole pane, much like how any one of the prophecy's predictions falling through would immediately shatter the premise of preordained fate. Even if broken though, the prophecy murals in Chapter 4 simply reform in a new location, hinting that even if an element of the prophecy seems to have been subverted, it may really have just been forestalled until an equivalent event can happen at a future point in time. Reading glass as a stand-in for fate also lets us go back and read this iconic line from Spamton Neo's battle in a new light. Smells like rotten glass becomes a reference to Spamton's fate being rotten, a 4-word biography of a character defined by his desperate struggle to escape his deterministic role in a universe that has already preordained his failure, and also that one time he was divorced by a TV. Wait, that's really the last line before the conclusion? God damn it, I wanted this to have a moody tone. Okay, nothing a bit of music can't fix. How about... Oh, no, not that. Okay, what about... No, too much. Maybe... Okay, if it works, it works. Now, let's take stock. For all my own uncertainty about what the premise of this video even was, I think what it's amounted to in the end is relatively clear. It's a portrait of Deltarune sketched from 9 angles. 9 distinct viewpoints, each corresponding to one of the game's most prominent motifs, as voted by me. Heaven, hell, light, hope, water, darkness, stars, glass, and the prophecy. So far we've gone roughly symbol by symbol and tallied which aspects of Deltarune feed into that respective motif, mapping out a sort of domain over which each holds sway like a Deltarune zodiac. And finally, by noting where these domains overlap, we've mapped out connections between the symbols themselves. While we can indeed form the symbols into a fully connected network by following every possible link between them, I think we can paint a much more coherent picture by grouping them into 3 rough sub-networks, what I'll call the Theological Group, the White Pen Group, and the Fallen Star Group. The first of these is a sort of awkward throuple between heaven, hell, and the prophecy, and true to the spirit of awkward thruples, one of these members is a bit of a third wheel. You may assume the rules card of this relationship is prophecy, with heaven and hell being such an iconic power couple IRL, but you'd be wrong. The interloper here is hell. Heaven and the prophecy enjoy an effortlessly intimate relationship due to their common ties to the church and the angel, whereas hell is only really included here for being the real-world counterpart of heaven. If we're talking strictly in-game evidence, the two surprisingly have almost nothing to do with each other, aside from this pair of juxtaposed prophecy murals in Chapter 4. Despite encompassing some of Deltarune's most important concepts, the angel and the prophecy, I'd say this group of theological symbols has actually been the least productive to analyze, and that comes down to the sheer vagary of the constituent symbols. The prophecy is everywhere and affects everything, hell is barely there at all, and heaven is currently defined mostly as an extension of the angel, a being of such mysterious nature and mired in so much contradictory information that it's one of the few things in Deltarune I'd accuse of being deliberately speculation-proof. As I implied near the beginning, I believe that Deltarune's heaven and hell are best understood as placeholders for opposing sides in a yet unrevealed dualistic conflict that underpins the setting, likely with heaven playing the role of upholding the prophecy and hell trying to break it, though we haven't yet seen any concrete examples of the latter. Next up is the meager but mighty White Pen group, featuring the symbols of light and hope. Light has been a central motif in Deltarune since the beginning, both as a counterpart to darkness and by virtue of the light inside your soul lyric from the game's main theme. Hope, on the other hand, went basically unmentioned until Chapter 4, and it's this additional puzzle piece that's let us finally make some headway in understanding light's true significance. To summarize my mini-theory from halfway through the video, I believe hope and light are basically two words for the same thing, or more pointedly, that hope is a more explicit word for the power light has represented all along, the same power contained within Chris's soul. What does this power do? Well, according to what we see literally happen on screen, it banishes darkness and grants access to save points. According to Gerson's ramblings, it still banishes darkness, but also potentially acts as an opposing force to the prophecy. This creates a strange link between darkness and fate as mutual counterparts to light and hope, which is part of what initially led me to conclude that heaven was fundamentally dark in nature, before realizing the waters were too muddy to bother making that argument. Also, the power of hope in Chris's soul comes from the real-life player by way of Gaster. Maybe, if you want. That one's mostly just for fun. But of course, the real star of the show, pun absolutely intended, is the family of symbols relevant to the fallen star. Water, glass, darkness, and stars themselves. It may seem like a weird choice to group such a broad collection of motifs, including darkness itself, under the name of such an obscure entity as the fallen star, but as I hopefully made clear during this analysis, the fallen star is uniquely positioned as a connective point between all of these concepts. In one fell swoop, the book describing the fallen star draws definitive links between stars, glass, and water. Meanwhile, the rest of the game sets up very strong links between water and darkness. So many of the game's grandest concepts turning out to be linked in this way by one tiny block of text comes off to me as Deltarune falling on its knees and begging for analysis like a Hello Neighbor PR intern. And so, for the sake of argument, I'll proceed under the assumption that some way, somehow, we actually have a chance at making sense of this. As our first step forward into this new and wildly optimistic reality, let's consider the meanings of the individual symbols. Most disappointing first. Stars, for now at least, I'm gonna write off as basically unknowable. They're pretty much only tied to the Roaring Night, and we currently know too little about the Night's deal to leverage much speculation on what particular aspects of theirs the stars represent, or vice versa. Glass, on the other hand, strikes me as relatively clear in symbolic purpose, again, pun absolutely intended. Glass is prophecy stuff, crystallized fate, destiny residue. Glass is to Deltarune's deterministic universe what this yellow shit is to Chernobyl Reactor 4. I included prophecy in the theological symbol group earlier, but the connection to glass is strong enough that it really should be included here too. There's no reason it can't just be in both. What glass's link to fate means for the shadow crystals or the black shard, I don't actually know. The function of shadow crystals is so nebulous that I could probably sit here and spin a dozen different variations of how their power is secretly tied into fate all along, but I don't really see what that accomplishes. For the purposes of my analysis, I'd rather just leave them in the background for now. And so at last, standing as our final and most daunting analytical challenge, we have water and darkness. I'm speaking of them both as a collective entity because, much like with light and hope, I think they basically function as one. Darkness and water in Deltarune are so closely linked that the game seems to occasionally forget there's a distinction at all. Is the roaring an endless night or an obliterating flood? Does your heart shine through the dark, or does it navigate the waves? The overlap is clear as day, but the reasoning behind it is the real question. What is the common factor pinning this duality together? The symbolic coin which houses water and darkness as its two inextricable sides. Well, I'll give you one hint for my guess. Check the title of the video. That little rabbit hole, though, isn't just a tangent, it's part fucking 2 of the video series. It really is that bad. And to get there, we first have one more piece of groundwork to lay. The other crucial property of water in Deltarune's cosmology, and the reason we're discussing it in the context of the fallen star at all. Water is the source of glass. Maybe you've already felt this implication looming overhead, but around the time I reached the conclusion that glass could be Deltarune's symbol for fate, there was this thought that started to form. A thought that started small and fleeting, but took root and grew the longer I spent rummaging through the game's dark corners, feeding off a menagerie of strange and disparate sources like a cerebral tapeworm. What if the glass-like something that grew from the fallen star's tears wasn't the obvious conclusion of shadow crystals or the black shards, or any other one particular shard of magic glass Chris may come across in their adventures? What if, in spite of the fallen star's meager presence in the current narrative, we're not thinking big enough? What if this glass, the glass which grew from the bitter water, which itself fell as tears of the fallen star, was the prophecy of Deltarune itself? The genesis of a deterministic narrative. Welcome to the end of this video, and the beginning of what I will heretofore refer to as the ink theory. Yep, I finally did it. I gave one of my own readings a marketable name. It's for good reason, though. The territory I plan to explore in part 2 of this series can't realistically be summarized as any one simple topic. Rather, it's a punchline, an attempt to wrangle the endpoints of the winding and branching symbological road we've traveled thus far into a coherent mental model of Deltarune's history, cosmology, and high-level meta-narrative premise. The origin of the prophecy will be discussed, the Forgotten Man's ramblings will be taken way too seriously, any and all character study will be sidelined, and I'll probably find some excuse to infodump about fractals. For better or for worse, I've been cooking, and I'm very excited to show you all what's in the pot. One slight problem though. Chapter 5 is probably coming up before I do that. This is the very thorny elephant in the room that I've been skirting around thus far. The sheer complexity of this analysis, combined with me being pretty badly drained of creative gas in the wake of finishing Ramb, meant that this project took way longer than it should have, as evidenced by the line in the intro referencing falling leaves, and that's put me in a tough position timeline-wise. My basic plan is to go ahead with writing and editing the more universal parts of the follow-up, while leaving the door open to significant revisions post-Chapter 5, but without knowing what lunatic bullshit that chapter actually contains, nothing I say is a guarantee. There's a real chance that Chapter 5 drops and torpedoes my entire reading, and I just have to scrap the project, just warning you all in advance. Despite that, though, I hope this video offered enough insight and spectacle to justify its own existence, even in the worst-case scenario where it doesn't lead into a full-scale theory of the game. God knows I've released more pointless analyses than this. With that said, thank you for watching, pray that Toby Fox has mercy on my eternal soul, and remember, royalty is a continuous cutting motion.